He walked into courtrooms like a lawyer, into college campuses like a student, and into homes like a friend, but left only silence and blood behind. He blended in like wallpaper. In photographs he looked like the guy next door, clean-cut, confident, even handsome. To the people around him he was bright and promising. He held a job at a suicide prevention hotline. He attended law school. He shook hands with politicians. But behind that easy smile was a predator, one who was quietly crafting the perfect disguise: normalcy. There were no alarm bells when he approached women in parking lots, asking for help carrying books to his car. His arm in a sling, his voice disarming, he didn't just lure his victims. He made them feel safe doing what they thought was a good deed. It was an act, every bit rehearsed and intentional. He knew what people wanted to see: politeness, manners, vulnerability. So that's what he gave them. No one saw a monster. Not his professors, not his friends, not even the women who got away. And a few did, barely. One woman noticed something was off when he tried to shove her into his Volkswagen. She escaped and described him to police. But even then, it was hard to connect that description with the charming man others knew. No one could quite believe that someone so educated, so respectable, could be hiding something so depraved. That disbelief was Bundy's greatest weapon. While investigators were busy looking for someone suspicious, someone who looked evil, Bundy was smiling at cameras, studying case law, and eating dinner with friends. He was always 10 steps ahead, playing a role so convincingly that even law enforcement didn't know what they were looking at when he showed up in their offices offering to help with political campaigns. What made him especially dangerous wasn't just that he could fake being normal, it was that he believed in his performance. He convinced himself of his innocence in ways that confused even the sharpest minds. He could talk his way out of anything. If someone asked too many questions, he'd lean into his intellect, overwhelm them with logic, and turn their doubts into shame. He wasn't just a killer. He was a master manipulator. He had studied psychology. He understood human behavior. And he used that knowledge like a scalpel. He didn't just hide in plain sight, he thrived there. It wasn't enough to get away with murder. He wanted the satisfaction of being trusted, of being liked. The closer he was to being admired, the more powerful he felt. That power was what he craved. It was never just about the kill. It was about control, about pulling the strings without anyone seeing his hands. Even the media played into his illusion. Once his name came up in connection with a string of missing women, reporters who met him during early coverage described him as articulate, soft-spoken, and intelligent. Some doubted his guilt based solely on how he presented himself. He didn't fit the profile. He didn't have the wild eyes, the unkempt hair, the angry outbursts. He wasn't the shadowy figure in a dark alley. He was the man who held the door open for you on the way in. It was a terrifying realization that evil doesn't always come in the form people expect. Bundy forced the world to reckon with that truth. He used charm like a knife, cutting through the defenses of everyone he encountered. People didn't see danger when they looked at him. They saw someone who reminded them of a friend, a student, a son. And that's why they let their guard down. He was methodical in how he built this illusion. He dressed well. He kept a calm voice. He was careful with his words. Every public appearance was calculated. And behind it all, he was always watching, studying how people reacted, learning which behaviors made them trust him. He was a predator disguised as prey. His victims, mostly young women, were often chosen because they fit a type. Brunette, part their hair in the middle. College-aged. Independent, intelligent. Bundy had a fixation on this image and perhaps deeper, unresolved obsessions linked to women from his past. But his attacks weren't driven by random urges. They were planned. He would stalk university libraries, campuses, parks, anywhere a vulnerable moment could be seized. And no one suspected a thing. Even when missing persons reports began piling up, no one looked at Ted. Why would they? He had a future. A name. A reputation. He wasn't just hiding behind the image of a good man, he was that image to everyone around him. That's what made him so dangerous. And yet there were cracks. Whispers. A woman who had dated him reported disturbing changes in his behavior. A friend mentioned his car seemed oddly stripped inside. But those who raised suspicions were often dismissed. After all, who wants to believe a monster is standing right in front of them, asking for a cup of sugar? That's the horror of it. Evil didn't wear a mask. It wore a smile. And no one saw it coming, until it was far too late. It started quietly, like a shadow slipping through fog. One missing woman turned into 2, then 5, then 10, all vanishing under similar circumstances. No signs of struggle, no murder weapon, no witnesses. Just silence, panic, and the growing realization that someone was hunting. In Washington state, women began disappearing from campuses and public parks. Most were young, intelligent, and strikingly similar in appearance. Brunette, parted hair, slender builds. The similarities were no coincidence. He was selecting them deliberately, following a ritual that only he understood. He stalked them in libraries, watched them from behind trees, followed them to their cars. Every movement was calculated. Every step closer brought him the control he craved. He became bolder. One summer day at Lake Sammamish, thousands of people surrounded him, and still, he took two women just hours apart. Witnesses finally described a man approaching women, using a fake arm cast and a polite request for help. He introduced himself as Ted. The illusion was beginning to crack, but not fast enough. Meanwhile, as law enforcement scrambled to piece together clues, he was already on the move. Crossing state lines, shifting identities, and never leaving behind enough to tie him to the crime. Utah, Colorado, Idaho, Oregon. Each state became a new hunting ground. Each crime more violent, more controlled, more confident. The pattern was chilling. Disappearances near wooded areas, bodies dumped miles away, often mutilated, sometimes revisited. But still there was no fingerprint, no smoking gun. Just fear, and the feeling that whoever this was, he was always watching. In Utah, he tried to snatch a woman from a high school parking lot. She fought back, and this time, police were able to collect a description. The net was tightening. For the first time, a composite sketch and witness reports began circling law enforcement agencies. One woman, a former girlfriend, contacted police. She had noticed disturbing behaviors, obsessive routines, disappearances. She told them his name was Ted. Still, the system was fractured. Departments weren't communicating. Files were scattered. Leads were lost. There was no centralized database. Each state worked alone, which meant Ted was always a few steps ahead. His car was his weapon, an old, beat-up Volkswagen Beetle with a missing passenger seat. Victims never had a chance. Once inside, it was over. But eventually, a mistake. In August 1975, he was pulled over in Utah for suspicious driving. What officers found in his car was chilling. Handcuffs, a ski mask, an ice pick, rope, trash bags. It looked like a kill kit, and it was. Still, it wasn't enough to hold him. He hadn't been caught in the act. But police were watching now. They were connecting dots. And finally, arresting him on suspicion of burglary opened the door to something bigger. When he was placed in a lineup, a woman who had escaped his grasp identified him without hesitation. Her voice shook as she pointed. This was the man. This was the one. Charges were filed. For a moment, it seemed the nightmare was over. But Ted Bundy didn't intend to stay in a cell. Behind bars, he remained calm, charming, and cooperative. He read law books, studied his case, smiled in court. Reporters noted how articulate he was. Judges complimented his demeanor. No one seemed to grasp that the man sitting in front of them was a vortex of violence, cloaked in civility. And while the courts prepared for trial, he prepared for escape. He jumped out of a courthouse window during a recess. Just vanished. No one expected it. No one thought he'd try. But he did, and he disappeared for 6 days. When caught, he smiled. Brushed off the escape like a prank. Still, security tightened. The world watched closer. But he wasn't done. Months later, in the middle of the night, he escaped again, this time through the ceiling of his jail cell. He spent hours removing screws, quietly loosening bolts, and crawling through the building's framework. When guards checked his cell, he'd stacked books and blankets to look like a sleeping body. By the time they realized he was gone, Ted Bundy was already halfway across the country. His trail of blood wasn't just a path of victims. It was a map of failure, a reminder of how blind the system had been to the predator in their midst. He had used their assumptions, their rules, and their blind spots against them. Even as bodies piled up and his name circled through agencies, Ted Bundy was still walking free, still hunting, and still wearing the same harmless smile. What they didn't know was that his next move would be his deadliest yet. He was no longer just a fugitive. He was a phantom, moving through cities, blending into crowds, hitching rides, and sleeping in motels under borrowed names. The second escape had worked. No alarms. No witnesses. Just an empty jail cell and a note left behind, mocking the people who thought they had him contained. By the time law enforcement realized he was gone, he was already across state lines, invisible once again. While America watched in disbelief, Ted Bundy walked freely through Florida. No disguise. No fake mustache. Just confidence. Audacity. He knew the law was behind him, but he also knew how far behind. It was a gamble, and he was willing to bet lives on it. Weeks after the escape, something monstrous happened. In the early morning hours of January 15, 1978, he slipped into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. It was quiet. The women were asleep. In less than 15 minutes he had attacked 4 of them. 2 were dead before help arrived. 2 more would live but never fully recover. Their wounds told the story: blunt force trauma, strangulation, biting. It wasn't just murder. It was rage unleashed with surgical precision. And still he wasn't done. Just days later, another woman was attacked. 12-year-old Kimberly Leach disappeared from her middle school. Her body would be found weeks later, hidden in a pig shed, discarded like garbage. The brutality had reached new levels, and by now there was no doubt, Bundy wasn't just hiding. He was escalating. The murders shocked the country. News outlets ran with it nonstop. Sorority sisters described waking up to blood-soaked sheets and screams. Witnesses recalled seeing a man slipping out of the house, calm and composed, vanishing into the dark. It was chaos, and still law enforcement had no idea where he was. But arrogance has a way of undoing even the most careful criminals. Bundy was pulled over in a stolen vehicle in Pensacola. The officer didn't yet know who he had in handcuffs, but the suspect put up a fight. When he was finally subdued, fingerprints confirmed it. They had Ted Bundy. The capture wasn't quiet. It exploded across headlines. After years of taunting authorities, escaping jails, and piling up victims across 7 states, Bundy was finally in custody. But even then, the spectacle had only just begun. In the courtroom, he played a role few expected. He acted as his own lawyer, cross-examining witnesses, objecting to prosecutors, addressing the jury with the calm confidence of a trained attorney. Cameras rolled as he smiled, joked, and manipulated the courtroom like a stage. The judge called him bright. Reporters called him charismatic. Spectators were torn between horror and fascination. But behind the theatrics, the evidence mounted. Fiber analysis, bite mark comparisons, blood samples, they all pointed to him. One of his surviving victims testified. She had seen his face clearly that night. The memory never left her, not even for a second. Her voice cracked when she said his name in court. Then came the bite mark. On one of the sorority victims' bodies was a distinct set of teeth impressions. Bundy's dental impressions were matched. It was as if his own body had betrayed him, etching his identity into the skin of someone he tried to erase. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. The death sentence was handed down. But the trial was far from over in spirit. For the next 10 years, Bundy would appeal, delay, and manipulate the system, giving interviews, sending letters, offering confessions in exchange for time. He turned death row into his final act, one more stage for his ego to perform on. He toyed with investigators. Offered just enough detail about other victims to stay relevant. Dozens of murders were eventually linked to him, though the true number remains unknown. He kept the final count buried, locked away in the same vault where he kept the worst parts of himself. Some suspect the number of victims could be far higher. Some believe he would never have stopped. But on January 24, 1989, the final curtain dropped. At 7:16 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. Crowds outside the prison cheered. Some held signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." The man who once believed he could outthink, outcharm, and outrun everyone had finally run out of road. The legacy he left behind wasn't just blood and tragedy. He changed the way law enforcement worked. His case helped usher in the era of behavioral profiling, leading to the development of the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The idea that a killer could be clean-cut, educated, and seemingly normal, that was Ted Bundy's gift to history. A terrible, enduring warning. Monsters don't always look like monsters. In the end, Bundy's genius wasn't in the crimes themselves, but in how long he convinced the world that he couldn't be capable of them. His real weapon wasn't a crowbar or a knife. It was trust. And once he had it, there was no going back.